So you had a glimpse yesterday, so
it's not
a full surprise. But without further delay, let's see.
Look around. Yeah, absolutely.
What we have
Looking forward to it.
I hope we do have some things you haven't seen, which is a good sign. Yes. But let's see. First thing, only place where we have something written in the wall and it's written in Portuguese. We are an international project, but we are also in Portugal, so we need to respect that. And basically here we try to explain that this is an homage we do to the people that gave us the home computer, people like your father, of course, people that work with him, like we mentioned yesterday, Chris Curry, Nigel Sir, and Jim Westwood. I haven't met them. Steve Vickers, I've met him. Richard Altvasser, we worked together with him in the UK. And David Carwin, who was the guy from the QL, that was also here.
Just out of interest here, I recognise some of the names very well. Chris Curry was always around the house when I was a child. He went on to ARM computers and stuff, and Nigel Searle was always around. He was the American.
The guy that went to the US. He lives in Florida now.
Oh, okay, I haven't seen him since I was
You mentioned Chris Curry. That's probably a good moment. Certainly people made you this question. I did this question to Grant also in the past, to your cousin. But so it is a myth that your father became, let's say, well, upset he might have been, but they get along, they kept getting along more or less okay, and Chris Curry, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my father didn't get a little upset, he went completely ballistic.
Okay, very upset.
You would not want to be on the receiving end of Clive's wrath. He went absolutely ballistic, and ended up infamously, my dad hitting him over the head with a newspaper.
Okay. And the thing in the Baron of Beef.
That's right, yeah. And actually, that was just the day before Christmas, or 2 days before Christmas. So the newspapers, the last newspapers before Christmas Day, I guess Christmas Eve, it was all over the front of the papers.
Okay.
So
but over the years,
but after that, they sort of calmed down and they were sort of close friends. And at my father's funeral, Chris was there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because Grant told me that there was.
Yeah, I think they weren't talking for a while, but after time
heals everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Walked under the bridge, and they were close friends. And then Nigel Searle, I remember, used to visit the house a lot. He was always a lovely chap. And then Jim Westwood. My father actually met in there's a small shop in Cambridge which is gone now. You could buy electronic components.
Okay.
And Jim Westwood, when he was a lad, used to work behind the counter. And the story goes that one day my father came in to buy some components, and Jim recognised him from the magazines he'd been on and said, "Oh, well, I've been, you're Clive Sinclair." And he said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, I've been doing some of your transceiver designs, but there's a couple of them have got errors in them, and I think I've improved the circuit and got rid of the faults."
Okay.
My dad said, "Well, would you like a job?" And, so here Jim Westwood came in, and Jim Westwood was the head of the engineering for decades afterwards. So whenever I visited the factory, Jim Westwood was always there.
Okay.
And,
very nice.
I remember actually picking up my first computer, which was a Tandy TRS-80, and that was Jim Westwood.
Supplying it.
Yeah.
Okay. You're still in contact with them? Or?
Not really. Jim Westwood was at my father's funeral as well, and I've sort of bumped into him in Cambridge.
It would be nice to try to make these connections and talk with them and all that.
Okay. Yeah, well, I might be able to, if you remind me, I might be able to, I can ping Jim an introduction.
So, moving. First part of the museum is the first moment where we try to understand what your father did before the computers. And so that's when we start learning that he started publishing some books, working for Bernard's Radio manuals, editing those kind of books. Before that, there is a magazine we have in another room, which is the first time that he appears in a magazine, supposedly in November of '58, with the micro midget that he created, and he's in the cover of the magazine. All of these are components for sound stuff. What I like most is when we start reaching this, let's say, tiny object, because one thing we explain here to the visitors is that there are 3 characteristics that are common to all the products that we saw from Sir Clive Sinclair. One is miniaturization. So he always tried to develop things that were as small or as possible, and so we see advertisements comparing a radio with a matchbox or comparing a calculator with a pen or some keys. So miniaturization was a key thing. From what I understood. Second thing, the marketing, which was very creative.
Actually, just if I made, there's an interesting explanation with the miniaturization, because people used to talk about that a lot and sort of trying to understand psychologically why miniaturization was so important. My father used to explain it, said it wasn't anything clever psychologically, it was just that electronics themselves were getting smaller. So if he's going to design stuff, it's very difficult to invent something that's completely new. I mean, some of his products were, but generally it's very difficult to just come up with a whole new concept. So a lot of the time what he did was just take something that existed, like a radio. What do you do with it? I can make it a lot smaller, so that'll be the selling point. Okay. So that was just really why the miniaturization was so central to it, is the components were smaller and he could design the electronics and the circuitry to cut out as many components as possible, so he could work out how to make it smaller. And since radios were popular, a smaller one would be popular as well. So I think
what you're saying makes a lot of sense and fits totally in one thing he said in an interview, which is, I don't know if I can say it like this, but someone asking what was his favorite computer from the ones they designed, and he clearly said the ZX81, because it's a computer that was made with 4 components, with 4 chips basically. And that makes sense regarding what you're saying. So simplifying the design using the advancement in electronics that were coming out, and so going smaller.
Yeah, absolutely. When it came to the computers, the Spectrum, for example, was all on one small circuit board. Yes. If you physically opened other computers at the time, they were covered in components. Yeah, and there was the trick of getting the cost down, which ended up with it smaller as well.
Okay, very nice. So second characteristic, the marketing, and then we have things like the Britain's smallest radio, the world's smallest radio. We have a few examples of that. Third thing, low cost. So that was always, I think, the main driver, which was to reach products that were accessible from a cost point of view.
I think that's right. He wasn't never particularly interested in trying to design something that was incredibly expensive that a few people bought. He wanted to design stuff that everybody. Yeah, that was the aim. That was the goal to aim at.
Okay. Yeah. So makes a lot of sense. Most of the thing here is from the 60s. There is 1 or 2 exceptions over there. Over here, then we have the Black Watch, which is the first biggest problem he faced, and it was when the UK government had to inject money in the company and things start changing it. So things were going very well from the calculators. The Black Watch was something that was amazing in my opinion, but very futuristic. I like the design of it still, but it faced a lot of problems because of the size of when people assembled.
I think the assembly was difficult, and also obviously it was tested in the winter time, but when it was launched in the summertime, they found that static electricity fried the electrics in it. So loads of them were coming back, and then at the same time the UK post office went on strike. Okay. So they couldn't get the watches out and therefore the money in because everything was mail order. So that sort of combination of a problem with the watch itself and not being able to get money into the company, that tripped it. When the government helped to bail out the Sinclair because of the financial problems after the watch, he said the government bring in a director into the company. He said that was easy to start with. He was just, he was still in charge, and the government guy would just say yes to everything. My father wanted to do the computers. The government guy was like, no, we're good at calculators and
Why
meters
do
and
more?
stuff. Yeah, so that's when my father said, well, fine, I'll do something on the side.
Okay. And he had another company called Science of Cambridge, which is the one that started that thing. So nice. So he was going very well with the calculators from 72 to 79. We have others in another room that we'll see. Consider one of the first pocket calculators, the Executive, which had a very clever design. And you were talking to me about that yesterday, and I think it's very interesting. So one thing they did was come up with a way to turn the power on and off in a way that you could use batteries from the watches to power the calculator. Because before this, calculator had a power plug and they needed to
That's right. So the story behind that was that Jim Westwood, the LEDs, the reason that all the other calculators on the market used big batteries or you had to plug them into the mains was the amount of power drain they took. So Jim Westwood with the LEDs, he was messing around with them in the lab and noticed that if you switch the LED off, it actually stayed lit for a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
So they worked out that you could reduce the power consumption by actually switching the LED off at a high frequency. The human eye didn't pick it up, but actually get the battery consumption right down.
Yeah.
And also my father designed the idea of putting little magnifiers over each of the elements, so that the LED itself was very small, but with a magnifier over the top, if you held it in your hand, it looked like a larger LED and functioned like one. And again, that got the power consumption down, and that meant you could get small batteries, and that means you can make a pocket calculator. So
and you were referring something, because I've learned a lot already about this part, and so my speech will start to change in the next visits. Yeah. But you also mentioned one thing, which is people believed that that with using those magnifiers, the brightness of the LED would get lower.
Yeah, that's right. So you would think if you've got a very small LED and all you do is come up with the idea of putting a magnifier over it, obviously the magnification makes it bigger, but you would expect it to make it dimmer as well. But my father, who knew a lot of sort of physics, there's a law in physics, but I don't quite know. But basically, you can magnify the light source, and it makes the image bigger, but doesn't reduce the brightness. I don't quite see why that's the case, but that is the case. So he knew that from the laws of the physics. So he applied it to this, and that worked very well. And after that, when you're still getting the LEDs, all the other manufacturers copied the same technique that my father had invented.
Nice. Then another passion it seems your father had. He announced it in the 60s, he launched it in the 70s, and he continued in the 80s, was the pocket TVs. Engineers from Timex tell me, so this was manufactured in Dundee, not in Portugal, but the engineers from Timex Portugal, they explained to me that from an innovation point of view, this is brilliant in the sense that you have a beam of electrons, of light, that you need to make a curve to be able to create a TV set like this. It's a nightmare to fine-tune. If you need to adjust anything, it's a nightmare. But it's, from an innovation point of view, something very interesting. So this is the first part. Of course, there are other things that Sir Clive Sinclair did before the computers, but we see them in other parts of the museum. Mm-hmm. All good?
Yeah, fantastic.
There's one thing, I can ask right away, but several people claim that the reason behind the name ZX80 was Z80 and the X to bring a kind of a mystical factor to it.
That sounds true to me. I mean, it definitely, the Z80 was the reason for the ZX80's name.
Okay.
And I've not heard the idea of adding the X to add a little bit of sciencey magic to it, but that would make sense. Definitely the Z80 element came from the chip. And adding the X probably. Okay.
So the ZX Spectrum is a computer that was accessible, affordable, because it used two things we had, the TV set and the tape recorder. And this is where we had our games mostly. Your grandfather, your father came up with another concept, the microdrive, but we'll see it
Okay, I remember.
in another place. And people in Portugal complain with him.
Yeah, I had a microdrive on my computer in QL when I was at first year at university.
Okay.
And it would automatically, check to make sure it saved properly.
Okay.
And then would automatically, if it hadn't saved properly, it would automatically save again and then automatically check.
Okay.
And if it still didn't save properly, it would automatically save again. And it just got it, you couldn't get it out of the loop. The only way to get out of the loop was to physically pull the microdrive out. And just hope the computer didn't crash. That was an early machine, but even so. There is a little bit of a story behind that actually.
Yes,
when I was in, I think it would be 1976 or 1977, my father, because I think Chris Curry was very keen on the computers idea, my father less so, and then about 76, 77, my father gave me a Tandy TRS-80 and home computer, which he'd brought over from the US. And I met Jim Westwood, as I was saying earlier, showed me it when we went up to St Ives, and I spent the whole summer absolutely mesmerised by it. I read the entire manual, I learned to program by myself, I wrote a little computer game that was sort of like for, the one-on bandits, they call them, the machines where you, gambling machines, you put your money in and
with some random numbers.
Yeah, so I wrote that to work on the TRS-80 and actually when we went to the States, which was kind of our first foreign trip, I saw these games for sale on the TRS-80, and there's between 20 or 30 games, and I looked at them and I could think, well, I could write most of them. There was only half a dozen that I couldn't see how to write it, and the game I'd done was probably in the top 5 games that they were selling, but in the meantime I'd recorded over the cassette to put some music on it. But I think that was my father saying, I saw an interview, the sort of inspiration for him thinking, this 10-year-old is like mesmerised by a computer.
But mesmerised by learning to program was always
because also in those days you couldn't buy any games. So if you had a computer, you had to think of something to do. And I used to like playing on the arcades.
Okay.
So I thought, I'll write the program.
That was the dream of everyone, trying to bring the experience of the arcade to home.
And it worked well actually. It was a good program.
Nice.
I triple nested 4 next loops, which it said not to do in the manual, and I wanted the 3 reels. I wanted the first one to stop, the second one to stop, and the third one to stop to make it look real. And I thought about it overnight, and I thought I've got to try and triple nest 3 next loops, and so I put that in the program. And it worked, So
it's fascinating. Programming has that.
It was really good fun.
So they came up with this 1K of memory, no sounds, black and white, amazing feature. I like it a lot. You press a key and the screen blinks because it can't do 2 things at the same time. But it started having some success and it showed that there was a market for this. And this is in 1980. Then in 1981, ZX81 with more or less the same features, but they solved the problem of the blinking. They came up with a way to address that. We are in 81, and then we go to 1982. The computer was supposed to be called ZX82, but because it was the first in color, it was called ZX Spectrum, which we have here.
Because they'd done ZX8 in 1980 and ZX81 1981, and the Spectrum was due to come out in 1982, they started to realise they were making a rod for their own back.
Everyone was starting every year.
Yeah, when's the 83 coming out? When's the 84 coming out? So they sort of changed to a name, so the name could stay for a few years, and people weren't demanding a new computer.
Taking pressure from ourselves. Let me make you another question. It's just a tiny detail, but there's not much information on that. Do you have any memory of your father mentioning? Because I think your father did meet Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, all those guys. Is there any story that you can share with us? Anything you remember?
I don't remember any stories about Bill Gates. Obviously, he met the Johnny Ives, the guy who did the design for
Apple.
Yes, so I think they sort of met up and he had a chat. The story I thought was just my father saying it's ridiculous to have an internal battery, that you should be able to take the battery out, which obviously is like, well, no, it works quite well with an internal battery, but don't tell Clive that. So I met there, but we met Osborne when I was a child from Osborne Computers when we were over in the States. I went for a drive in his car. He had a classic car with a valve radio. It was a classic car in the day. And we went to his house. There was loads of channels on the TV, which is amazing because it was only 3 channels in the UK. So we met Osborne, but I don't remember any Steve Jobs or
I think there's at least some reference to that. Sometimes I explain to people, and I do that. Of course,
that would have been obviously the same time, so early Apple stuff. Early 80s.
79. Of course, it's an exaggeration, but I think there's a lot in the Sinclair computers that has a parallel with the Apple computers in terms of design. You know that the Sinclair computer is black. Apart from the ZX80, you know it is black. And the black gives it, you look at any computer from the day and you compare it to the Spectrum. The Spectrum will look like a toy, but it's a toy that 40 years after you look at it, and normally you like it a lot from a design point of view. So I like to do that. Crispin, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you if you could sign this computer we have on display. I hope this is working. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So we have the Plus. In '84, they came up with the QL. The QL was an attempt to make a business computer, very important computer. People like Linus Torvald, who is the creator of the Linux operating system, so very important in technology, refers how important this computer was to him. But the fact is that it was launched with lots of problems. They had a lot of them coming back. So
I think there's also, it's interesting because they say some of the Apple iPhones are using the ARM chips that sort of came from and the Linux guy was saying that he grew up with a Sinclair computer. So it's lovely to hear that some of the seeds of the industry were sown on there. But I think the QL was flawed in that in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, a lot of parents were buying computers for their children, and that's where the Sinclair computers, because the Sinclair computers were really the first computers that a family on an average income could afford, and that's when everything exploded. But there was a big thing at the time, everyone's got a computer and all they do is play games on it. And of course the parents didn't realise, well actually the games industry will evolve into an industry that
is now bigger than everything.
So actually just playing the games is a great way to start. But there was a big thing, isn't it a pity? So there was a big push towards a serious computer.
Yes.
You should just do businessy things.
Timex did the same thing. They tried
everyone fell down the same hole, and I think that Sinclair did it. There was also other problems with the QL, but there was just this, it's a business machine. Nobody wants a business machine. Everybody wants to play games.
It's a boring machine.
So it was worthy, but boring.
Indeed. So the Pocket TV, the QL, and the C5 were the reason for them in '86 to sell the brand to Amstrad. So to Alan Sugar, and so that's when they came up with this series of computers, the Plus 2, Plus 2A or Plus 2B, the Plus 3. Amstrad,
that's right. And I was thinking the fathers did a deal with Alan Sugar, and the story I heard, and the numbers may be wrong, this is just a story, I guess, from father to son, but I think the team that he was going to negotiate with Alan Sugar, my father's team sort of thought about sort of £2 million or something was a fair figure. And my father thought, no, we can get 5 million for it. So he just did the negotiation himself, got the full 5 million. And Alan Sugar is one tough negotiator. My dad's like, no, it's 5 million. And he got it. I don't think and it's not a bad thing. He doesn't have a pride in what he makes in a way that maybe my father did. He just wants to know, I want to sell millions or whatever it is. Don't care what it is, I want to sell millions.
Yeah.
And so when my father was doing the worthy thing of the new business computer
and the new technology of microdrives,
exactly. Whatever's the new stuff is what my father's interested in.
The innovation.
Yes. Whereas Alan Sugar's like, no, the customer wants a cassette built in. They want it to look smart. They want it to,
And he copied their own models because you have the Amstrad ones.
So I think that Alan Sugar was sort of giving the market what it wanted, and my father's more interested in inventing something new.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense. So here we have, of course, after selling that, your father still came up with the Z88. We have that model, which is very uncommon. It's one of the first ones that says Cambridge Z88.
I used that at university after the QL.
It's a PDA.
Yeah, and it was a very good computer for doing your spreadsheets on, for word processing.
With Office, basically.
Yeah, it was a plug the printer straight in from memory. That worked very well. That was a nice computer.
So, and here we have two other computers that are related to, somehow indirectly, to Sinclair. Jupiter Ace is a computer made by Richard Altwasser and Steve Vickers that were the ones creating the ZX Spectrum, and then they left the company. And then the Grundy New Brain that I was telling you about that eventually was developed.
I think the problem with those computers was when the ZX81 came out, ZX80 and especially ZX81 ZX Spectrum, it was the first computer that people, I think in the world, that was affordable by the people on average incomes. So then everyone had one. As soon as everyone's got one, that's the computer you want because you can swap games with your friends. And then it wasn't, for a lot of people later, it wasn't so much the computer, it was the games.
Yes.
So because everybody had Spectrum games, you wanted to buy a Spectrum. So if you bought a Jupiter, none of the games are going to work.
But it's very relevant what you're saying, because that's what's behind the marketing of this machine. So it's a Sam Coupe from Miles Gordon Technology, and it's called kind of a Super Spectrum. And I find amazing the marketing of it, because what they did was something like this. This is much more powerful than a regular Spectrum. So they came up with a more advanced computer, and the pitch would be something around these lines. So you want a new computer, a better computer, but you still want to play your games from this packy, you can buy this one.
Yeah, it's amazing how many different manufacturers there were, and the effort that would have gone into just making something like that. And the Jupiters and Dragons and so many other.
I think this part is very interesting because many people come here and they say, oh, I had one of these. The fact is none of these computers is, let's say, normal. Normal in the sense that none of them is a normal Spectrum or Sinclair machine. So we have stuff here like Spectrum from Peru. We have a Brazilian Spectrum. Your father had a lawsuit in Brazil because they did all of this without permission, and so they copied the ROM and all that. The court was Brazilian, so Sinclair lost.
I know there was another court case, somebody copied one.
This one, for example. This was copied in US. They went to court, and then they licensed it to them.
Yeah, and
it's a ZX80 code.
It's difficult to know what to try and sue on. And I think he sued on the copyright on the keyboard. So that because it's not three-dimensional, it's not patent, it's copyright, and he could get them on copyright.
Okay.
So he went on that.
Yeah. So this is one case that is known that they had a problem, but afterwards they entered an agreement and they licensed it. That's a clone of the ZX80. These are the Argentinian computers. So you have different models here. The first ones were made in Portugal. Then you have things like a Spanish clone. You have a ZX81 from the Netherlands. Biocomp was the company behind Bang & Olufsen, that very famous brand.
Yeah, my father talked about Bang & Olufsen a lot, so that must be the
this was a distributor. This is a Nordisk version, so it's from I think it's from Sweden. Then we have things like a French Spectrum, and we start having some that I don't remember immediately. Czechoslovakia, because some of the countries no longer exist. Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. This is from India. Do you see anything strange here? Do you notice that there are some stickers? These stickers have Arab characters. So this is from Egypt, and the distributor in Egypt would install this switch to basically change between English to Arabic.
Okay.
Yes.
That's cool.
Here we have all the Brazilian clones. Then over here you had a couple of things. So this is from Uruguay, this computer, although it's like the Brazilian one, but it's the Uruguay version. That thing over there is an Anglo Tutor, which is an Italian thing. It's an English language course, but it uses a ZX Spectrum. And this thing here is the last unit of this thing called ILO. It's a tape recording mechanism advanced developed in Uruguay. It's the last unit they created, and they came here to the museum to donate it to us. And so it's over there. Here is the part dedicated to Timex. Timex was a US company, as we know, known for developing watches since 1854, the Waterbury Watch Company. And they were already doing, in the 80s, several other projects in the field of electronics. They were coming up with medical devices like scales, thermometers, blood pressure monitors. Fred Olson, the owner of the company, invested in things like a 3D camera. I don't remember the date, but 80s or 90s.
Yeah, I don't know if we ever used it, but I think I remember one in the house. So
the thing, it uses a film. It takes, so it has 4 sensors, takes two slides at the same time, so it burns 2 slides at the same time with these 4 sensors. And then what's special about it is the process to produce the picture, and it makes a picture that you can see it moving a little bit. Bottom line, your father approaches them, convinces them to get involved in this. They convert the factory or the factories they had in Dundee to produce the computers mostly for the British market to start, and they Timex secured the right to sell the computers in other markets like US, which is what they wanted. So very quickly, in '82, they come up with the Timex Sinclair 1000, which is a ZX81 with 2Ks of memory. The way it go in the beginning of the 80s was the guys in US, there was an innovation lab in Silicon Valley. The guys would be designing, coming up with these new concepts for these computers, for Timex brand. They created a company called Timex Computer Corporation over there, and they started coming up, so they tried to come up with an improved version of the ZX81 with the 16K of memory, the expansion.
Oh, the expansion pack. Yeah.
I don't know. It's there. The expansion pack, which is one of these. Yes, this one.
A little bit notorious.
Yes, and that gave a lot of problems because of the connectivity, the wobble, that was the problem. So they basically came up with one. The Antonio Gomes, which was the general manager of the factory in Portugal, went to the UK to Sinclair, and he saw the Spectrum. Because remember, they were doing this always 1 year behind. So they see the Spectrum, and they get the idea to use the design of the Spectrum for this new machine. That's why this looks so much as a Spectrum. But then the Americans realized that the Spectrum was not going to have success in the US. There was one thing that everyone said it was impossible to get, which was to sell a computer in the US, you need to have FCC approval. And FCC approval was related to the emission of radio frequency. And so you needed to overcome that. And with the Spectrum, the way it was constructed was considered almost impossible. They play with some silver inks to try to avoid that. They put some stuff on the modulator. They tried to deal with it, but it was very complicated. So, and the consumer was different in US. So they started designing a new computer that was called internally the TS2000. The guy that designed the case was a guy called Gary Grimes. I spoke with him to have this here on display. So it's the sketches that take you until the final design of the computer. They do this in '83. And what's the problem? The problem is that in '83, '84, you had the crash of the video games in the US. And so 1 year after they launched this computer, they got away from the computer business in the US.
Yeah, there's a few other stories that I've heard through the families. One is, I think, the FCC, the requirements for the lack of electronic radiation was really, from my father's perspective, like a smoke screen to try and protect the American market. Okay. So the Americans can't stop imports, but instead they create a standard
that
they
was
know the
impossible
imports will get through.
Okay.
And if you think about it, we all use Spectrums, ZX81s at home in Europe. They weren't creating electronic problems for your TV set or for your toaster or for anything else. So the standards in the US were really designed
to protect the market.
Anti-competitive.
It's very nice to me.
Yeah, and then also my father was saying that when the Spectrum came out, Texas Instruments in particular, other American companies wanted to get into the home computer market, and they realised, if you got in there early, if everyone bought your games, everyone else wanted to buy your computer. So he said the Texas Instruments were undercutting them price-wise, and when you opened up the Texas Instruments computers and start counting out the chips, and you know how much those cost at trade price.
It's impossible for them.
Yeah, they're not making a profit on those. If anything, they're making a loss on each one. But of course, Texas Instruments at that time could stand making a loss in order to try and gain market share, whereas the Timex and Sinclair couldn't. So that was another problem for them. And then the other story I heard, which I don't know is the case, that the Timex sort of wanted to sort of change the internals a chunk, but that would also mean some of the Sinclair games would have.
No, they did it. That's a problem they did here. So they use a different ROM, which meant this is not 100% or even 99%. This is not 99% compatible with
and the problem there again is that same classic
breaks
mistake.
the compatibility.
Yeah, because people are buying the computer to play the games.
Yes.
If you can't play the games, you're not going to buy the computer.
They put stuff like extended graphics, more power, things like that.
Great. You don't realise that the main selling point is the vast number of games you can get for it.
But it's a good thing what you're saying, because now I can explain you what the Portuguese guys did. So what the Portuguese guys did was, when they said we're going to stop with this, the factory in Portugal said we're not stopping. We're selling computers, we're assembling computers, we have a lot to do, so we want to keep going. And so the unit in Portugal kept going. And so one thing was, they kept creating the Spectrum, and then they picked up this concept, which is the Timex Sinclair 2068, and they created the Timex Computer 2068. So they did this in silver, like the US computer, or in black. Then, as I told you yesterday at dinner, they exported the black version to Poland. The Polish guys, basically, they did some changes in the computer. This one has more changes in the keyboard and all that. And they sold it with the brand Unipol Grid Computer, and they changed the name from 2068 to 2086, because this was in 86 and looked better, so they also changed that. The thing that gave, let's say, more visibility to the Portuguese unit was the creation of the floppy disk systems. The first version was like this, so you have a controller, a power supply, and one or more floppy disks. And then they did a version using 2 floppy drives that is this one, FDD 3000. I had one of these connected to my 48K rubber key Spectrum, so you could run games from disk. Unfortunately, they went with the 3 inches disc, which didn't become the standard. They knew it was a wrong decision, but they expected it to be cheaper. It was really a bad decision. In the end, they did the same as your father, or they did something similar to what your father tried to do with the QL, so the business computer, which is this. So when you connect this keyboard, which is basically a computer, with this floppy disk system and with this monitor, you can have a station running CPM. CPM was an operating system before MS-DOS that basically allowed you to run business software on it. So you could have this connected to the Spectrum or as a standalone CPM station.
So I remember the green screen, because that looked very sciencey back in the day. And you could even, if you had a black and white TV, people selling green film, they could stick over it so it looked
like this. Yeah. This was the future. Now it's the past, but it was the future.
This was mainly ZX Spectrum focused and Timex focused in that regard, but the museum itself is not in a vacuum. It's within a specific context. And so if we go on to our second part, we also have some computers of the era. Yeah, there we go. And we have our magic 80s era Portuguese living room. So this is so Portuguese typical at this point, because the typical experience for a early teenager child in Portugal would be having shared the common TV set with the family, right? And we would basically fight over mom who would get to see the soap opera versus who would actually be able to use the computer. These days, when we do shows or when we go somewhere into a venue in which we have to explain these things, I get teenagers going across and thinking, hey, look, there's the keyboard. And we tell them, no, it's not the keyboard, it's the whole thing. It's the computer plus the keyboard onto the same unit. So in these days, it was just the input for the TV as well. But on your back, we have a series of the most contemporary machines that you find there. So you have the Auric, which was also an 8-bit computer based on a different CPU set. You have, of course, the Acorn Electron, which Commodore was much more expressive in the US market, and mostly due to not only the machines themselves, but the fact that they would rely much less on cassette tape and much more on either disc or cartridge to load the game.
That makes sense. But also, I think, the Commodores, and I might be wrong here, because
not at all. You probably are not.
Family stories rather than facts. But my impression was, the Sinclair computers are out earlier, so 1980, 1981, 1982. They were there and perhaps could have got into the US, but didn't. And then the Commodores were worthy competitors for sure, big time. But they were a little bit later on.
So they're all lesson learned and the experience to know what worked, what not.
But as you say, probably the US incomes were a bit higher than UK and European incomes at the time. So being able to save money on a cassette recorder made a big difference to an average family in Europe and the UK, whereas the US incomes were a little bit higher, and having to wait 5 minutes to watch your game crash and restart had less of an appeal. But I think there was also that they couldn't go into the US with the electronic radio stuff. So there was elements,
a bit of market pressure plus technological advantage plus budget advantage.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I think it was a bit of both.
Out of curiosity, we would see starting to show up on the market the PC clones, the IBM PC clones. So in 81, 82, IBM starts putting out the IBM PC and its multiple variants. And in Portugal, we had a clone of our own. This is the Unique. It was made in University of Coimbra, actually from a team led by one of João's professors. This NR 1000 was basically built as a PC clone on the University of Coimbra, probably the first PC clone made in Portugal. There's a funny story regarding the Timex stuff, which is the fact that when they were on their later years on the Portuguese unit, they were discussing what to do, because the world was indeed going from 8-bit to 16-bit, and they were discussing whether to do a 16-bit PC clone, because they had these internal projects going on regarding how to push the 8-bit Spectrum compatible machines to the max, but they knew that the line was quickly cut short, of course. So they were discussing whether to do an IBM clone or not, and their lawyers were advising them against it because they were a bit afraid of what IBM's reaction might be and whether Timex had the full strength to actually dispute that in a court of law. So they ended up deciding against it, which was probably a second error part with the 3-inch drive thing. Okay. Let's go. Yeah. We have this tiny experimenting area in which you can load games or you can try to program the stuff and so on. We have our own little library for all of the Spectrum titles we tried to find and got our hands on. And we then do a bit of history regarding how the Sinclair machines evolved in time and their multiple variants. And we also showcase that this is something that did not conclude. It's a story that has not been concluded in the 80s, but people still push the ZX Spectrum machine quite a bit throughout throughout time. So you have all of these recreations. The multiple recreations for the Arlequin, which we have somewhere around here, which is a chip-by-chip recreation of the logic unit that you have in there that manages the screen, and of course the most recent stuff like the ZX Spectrum Next, which was a crowdfunded project, still designed by Rick Dickinson originally for the machine. So pretty much all of the extent for all of the production. We have some of the prototypes for the next year, and basically, so the message here that we put out is this is something that is still evolving. It involves a large community, as you are quite well aware of a large community of enthusiasts. I mean, you see some of those around here, right? There were a series of multimeters and measurement instruments from Sinclair, which were being put onto the market as well, and we have them here, of course. We try to have our collection.
I remember I was saying yesterday that I remember going off to the St Ives factory when I was a small boy, and these were there.
Really cool, because this is a much lesser known part of the Sinclair brand and the Sinclair offering, but there were quite a few made, and most of them are actually working that we have on the display there.
Yeah, I think my father was quite fond of.
Absolutely, it was. I believe his original passion, the very basic.
Yeah, probably is. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic.
Well, this is something you are certainly familiar with.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's a bit kind of bittersweet, probably, no?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I always thought. Actually, it's interesting to see this one because I haven't seen before.
Yeah, ours is fully kitted out.
Okay, yes. Yeah, maybe that's an optional extra. And the handlebars look a little bit different as well, actually. I don't remember that colour.
I do believe that some people made their own kind of custom mods when they got theirs.
Okay.
So ours might not be 100% pure out of factory. Nonetheless, and out of curiosity, we actually had to 3D print.
Yeah.
We had to 3D print one of the rear mirrors because the other one's nice, but this one's not.
Okay, it's good to 3D. Yeah, I think the C5 was, it's sort of a flawed design, really. I mean, it was the only Sinclair product that my father brought out that I thought I just didn't want one. Because the problem with them is electric cars are obviously amazing. We know there's millions of those, and electric bicycles are fantastic. But the C5, it sat very awkwardly between the two. It doesn't have the benefits of a bicycle. You can't leave it in the hall at home. It's quite a big thing. But it doesn't have the benefits of the car either. It doesn't keep you dry. It's not particularly safe. So it's almost doesn't work
kind of a hybrid, right?
Yeah, that's right. And originally the C5 was going to be a small electric car.
Yeah, sure.
And then there was a new rules came in, and in the UK, if it met certain criteria, it's not legally a car, so it made life a lot easier.
Probably not fully covered and stuff like that.
Right? Yeah, so then you don't need number plates, you don't need insurance. Sure. So my father sort of thought, okay, I'll strip it down.
I'll go in between.
Yeah, and that was kind of, with hindsight especially, it was a sort of a mistake.
Absolutely.
You either got to go up and do a whole car, or go down and do an electric bike, and both of those are very successful. It's that trying to do something in the middle was not a good idea.
That's very, very tricky.
Well, not just tricky, it was impossible. I mean, if you look nowadays, this is 30 years later, there's loads of electric cars, fantastic idea, loads of electric bicycles, but nothing similar to this, but for a reason.
Sure, but if you look at it feature-wise, the top speed, the range, it's very, very similar to a modern scooter. An electric scooter.
That's absolutely
the form factor that basically killed it, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of, there's no real benefit of sitting low down. You're better off high up on a bicycle, and the bicycle's easier and lighter as well. So when you're off the bicycle, you can pick it up, take it up some steps. Yep. There was just one of those. Not all ideas work, and
we even sometimes in shows we take the C5 with us, and this is something that people sometimes tell us. This would actually make sense probably in a place in which traffic would not be that dense, or you get a much more sunnier weather than the UK.
But there were elements. I mean, the design of it was fantastic. It still looks cool now.
Absolutely, almost space age.
Yeah, they did an absolutely cracking job on the look.
Then we have a few more, particular items. We have the Zike, of course.
Yeah.
Now out of the pure Sinclair original line, we still have the Zike, which makes us very, very proud.
Yeah, and I'd say I talk about the Zike. I think the Zike's an excellent design, but there was faults with it. The front, when you look at it as a bicycle, it does look like that front fork.
Indeed.
Is unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's a problem. That makes the bicycle unstable. So the later Zikes, I think they corrected the fault.
Put it at an angle.
Yeah, that's right. But the first one, my father fell off it in the original demo, and also I think a lot of the internal components. My father's always trying to get the costs down, and a lot of the internal components were plastic.
Yeah, so not that.
No, for something, it's all right getting the costs down on something that sits on your desktop at home.
Absolutely.
But something that's out and about.
On the elements, absolutely.
So didn't really have it. And that was a pity because actually, the idea of an electric bike was really good. The electric bikes that were available at the time were terrible designs, and this was 95% of the way there, but flunked it on the last 5%, sadly.
You could absolutely benefit from the extra reliability of stronger internal components.
That's right, and the look of it was, it looks right. The front fork,
functional at least.
And the front fork design is flawed.
Yeah.
But it was a basic flaw that
would be fixable.
Yes, that's right, so that was one that should have been a lot more successful.
He was actually also exploring the concept of electrifying bikes, like the ZETA here, right?
Yes.
So actually adding an element to actually putting the electricity element onto the bike to helping you out. So very modern in that regard.
Yes, and I was saying to yesterday that his design was explaining that.
Yeah.
That he uses a belt, and that's quite. I don't understand the maths of it, but it's quite a clever way that when you increase the power, the belt sort of pulls the motor onto the tyre, so you don't get a slippage. Whereas all the other people that tried to design it were using basically a rubber wheel on this to engage with the bicycle wheel. But if it's raining, that will slip. The way you get around the slippage is you increase the force that you're pushing onto the wheel with, but that increases friction dramatically. So this system was better than anybody else had tried. But the people have been successful with these things. But again, it was perhaps a little bit basic in how it looks.
Still very essential physics, very cleverly designed physics.
Yeah.
Low cost, still leveraging.
Yeah, that's right. There's quite a lot of physics and maths going on.
Absolutely. So very much Clive Sinclair in that regard.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And well, that pretty much concludes the first part of our museum.
This is a different room, a room that we gave the name Rosalina Alves, which is one of it's a former secretary of some executives at Timex. And so normally people say your best friend is the secretary of the person you need. Why? Because she has the contacts of everyone. So that happened here. So Rosalina was the person that started opening all the doors within people from Timex, and that allowed us to know much more of what they did in those days. So in this room that we can adapt for temporary exhibitions, we can use to watch a movie, make interviews and all of that. What we have on display when we don't have a specific theme is more stuff about Timex and Sinclair. Okay, we will this year reorganize the main exhibition because, for example, calculators, I want to have them all together and all that, and things grew up a lot. So we have stuff like computer games from the ZX Spectrum. We have those other two cabinets with those. We start here. We have probably the first things from your father, so the magazine that I mentioned from November '58 where he appears, the book that you gently gave to us about bicycle science.
Clive's old book.
Yes, and some magazines where there is stuff from Sinclair over here. We have a calculator with advertisement to Renault. We have the Sovereign and another Sovereign with advertisement to 4 and to a tobacco company. I didn't know the name, sort. We have the Sovereign limited edition, which has the royal stamp, and we have many Oxford calculators over there. And then we also have some things from your cousin Grant and your uncle Ian Sinclair, the Torch. So we're trying to. I'm also chasing some of the chess, the SciFi chess games that he developed, and so that's it. Then we have something that puzzles me, and if I ever talk to Alan Sugar, I will try to ask, but I'm sure no one remembers anymore, which is Amstrad launched this Sinclair Studio 100, which is a 4-track stereo system. But the funny thing is that they launched the version with the name Sinclair, which supposedly they couldn't, because supposedly the agreement was for computers, not for stereos, but they did it.
Yes, I was saying, I think that was probably Alan Sugar being cheeky, and probably the father after that told him don't do it again or I'll
And he
see
stopped,
you.
probably.
So, yes.
Yeah, because there was advertisement about this. Your father launched, Sinclair Radionics launched stuff like the amplifiers, the power supply. This is a power supply from Sinclair. This one so this has all the connections in the back. Oh, my fingers are in the back. So this is part of the amplifier thing. This is also from the amplifying. So you have, yes, please. Yes, it moves. It moves. So volume, and it is dual. So it's stereo.
That's why you make
it. Right, left.
Yeah.
Then we do have. This is one that is very nice, because on top of all the components, there was also, I don't know if it was Sinclair or another company, selling these cases to put the components within. So this is a typical, let's say, standard case for this Sinclair Stereo 60 equipment.
Yeah, I must admit I don't know either way. Actually, I was going to say I guess it was another company, but I just don't know. It was...
What I mean is it's not a custom made. It's something specific for the Sinclair 60. We have another Sinclair System 2000. Why? You may say, but I saw one already. No, you didn't. The one you saw there is a Mark II version. This is a Mark I. This is where the collectors get crazy.
Okay.
And so it's a different brand. I don't know now what is the difference. It's a different model, I mean, of the Sinclair System 2000. And here we have the Sinclair System 4000 that I was not sure if it existed in full or not, but it does. And we have it here. The ex libris in this part, to me, is the Sinclair Neoteric, which is from '65. Won some awards in terms of design, and it's a lovely piece.
That's a good design, isn't it? I was saying that was my uncle, my Clive's brother, my uncle Ian. He did the designs, and yeah, he's talented on the designs, and obviously Ian also designed the actual Sinclair logo itself.
Yeah.
And as Grant says, I think rightly, it's also developed the design language. So even after Ian had parted business-wise, that style and that language was still the Sinclair brand.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, yeah.
We have this thing, which is something I saw in Cambridge the first time. It's a thing called PBS Executive. It's basically a suitcase with a Spectrum, in this case a Spectrum Plus, some microdrives, some power supply, and some printer. It's a Timex or Alphacom printer, and this is the second part, so it's a briefcase that you would carry if you were a business person around. It's very, very heavy. Then we have here, you met John Harris, the creator of this futuristic design. He has a huge admiration for your father. So John Harris created this, he has these 2 books, and he created the image, which is this one, that is in the Spectrum manual. And all the manuals of the Sinclair stuff designed by this gentleman, John Harris.
Grant's got the actual.
The painting. He wanted to loan it to us, but I was scared with insurance and all that, so
that would be very close to Grant's heart. I think he's very proud.
He highlighted that Clive Sinclair gave him totally freedom. in terms of work. So it didn't restrict his creativity in any way, and he was very happy with that. This is
Chris
one
Curry was saying the same thing, that when he was in charge of doing the that first computer, he said that basically that's the one.
This is the one from the ZX81, I think.
So that used to be sitting in the living room at home, and a Grand Scholar now.
Yes.
But you can see the spaceships on the roof.
And I was looking for a third drawing that I want to show. Sorry, I want to show you. There's a third drawing. The Sinclair. Sorry, you can't read both of you. The Sinclair mural. One of two canvases.
Yep. These two paintings were sketches for a mural that was to be placed on the ends of two buildings set at right angles to one another at the entrance to a car park. The total width would have been 20 metres. When viewed from the centre of the car park, the horizon would have appeared as a consistent diagonal line. Sadly, the mural was never carried out. I wonder where that was going to go.
That's precisely the reason I was showing it to you. But so this is something that refers Sinclair and was not.
I've never seen that.
Yeah,
first time.
Here, this is a Portuguese thing. This is a computer game, Monopoly, using to play with a Spectrum computer.
Okay.
So you can play with it. It's a game called The Businessman. It's related to investment and things like that. Other Sinclair stuff. We have the kit to build calculators from Sinclair Radionics. So to teach young people how to build a calculator.
It's 1970s, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's still from Sinclair Radionics. So. So then we have, and to finalize the Sinclair part, all the rest is Timex. Then we have this less common thing. So here is the microdrives and all of that. We have some of the boxes from the TVs, and then we have this couple of things. This micropath is something that I read about and I found by accident. It's basically an interface that has technical contents of, I think it's homeopathy. And so you could use a ZX81 to help you with your practice as a homeopath or something like that. It's not very common. I don't know how many exist.
And of course, it's one of those classic examples where people are sort of computerizing something, so it makes it seem magical and scientific, whereas in fact you can have all the information in a book with an index, but it wouldn't look quite as
good. It's more, it's a future.
Yes.
Then we have the three, let's say, less common things from Sinclair companies. So the one that we don't have, we only have the picture to show, is the Squarial, the satellite receiver stuff and the antenna that we don't have. So if you find one in UK, let me know. Let me know.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Then we have probably the most, to me, and a part of what you told me yesterday, and I would like you to tell that story again on the phone, but this is probably the most, let's say, futuristic one. So from what I know, and yesterday you confirmed the idea, so when you produce a wafer of semiconductors, there's a lot of parts that don't work, so you need to crop them, take them out. They found a different process to reroute things and say this is good, this is not good, so you can configure it. And this is an attempt in 1989 to build an hard drive that could go up to 160 megabytes. This is a module. This is open. I think normally it's not like this. It's like this. And this is when you open it in half, and this one they put this glass to show. And this is a module of 20 megabytes of this hard drive, but we are talking about what is called now a solid state hard drive, which is what we use nowadays. So they were trying to do things with a different technology, but in 1989...
That's right, and that's the thing, there's a guy called Ivor Cat, oddly, that I think came up with the concept, and my father met him and really liked it, and I guess helped take the whole thing forward. And then, instead of traditionally, the manufacturer would break off all of these individually, test each individual one, bin the ones that didn't work and only sell the ones that did work. That's so this way you could just have everything on the whole chip, and as you were saying, the computer works out by itself which ones work, and if one doesn't work, it bypasses it and moves on to the next. So easier and cheaper to make. but I don't know why. My father was involved for a long time, but it never got off the ground. I don't know if other technology overtook it or what.
I can and I should explore this more. The person I bought this from is the marketing or general manager from Anamarti. So we were selling a bunch of them. A friend of mine bought one and told me that's how I got this one.
To know why that
so we could,
took off.
yeah, we could easily get in touch. I don't remember his name right now, but it's one of the persons I have in my list to contact again. Yeah. And then we have the phone, and you have memories of this phone, so probably you can help us.
I was saying the phone yesterday. So I had one at home, and I'm pretty sure it's still in the attic. So it was an early digital phone, and this was in the days when we still had landlines. Yeah, this was pre-mobile phones, or
in the beginning,
era when the mobile phone would have been a brick and cost £1,000. So the idea with this, it wasn't just my father. He was sort of, I think he designed the electronics. But it was going to be a big national scheme, I guess international, where you could sort of pull up at a petrol station and you'd have one of these, and this would connect on with a box that would be at the petrol station. Then you could sit in your car and make phone calls on this. But there were flaws with it. People couldn't phone you, and you still had to pay a monthly fee, which at the time was pretty expensive. So if you're doing that, you might as well, if a petrol station would have had a payphone anyway, so you could just go into the petrol station, put your coins into the payphone and use that, which is exactly what people did, because the number of people that actually needed to sit in their car and use a phone that nobody could call them on was pretty small. But at the time, at home you'd still have a landline, and then you'd have these handsets that lots of companies were selling that would use a radio signal from your handset, so you didn't have to have a cord on it anymore. Yes. So especially if you're a student, you lived in a shared house, you would take the handset into your room so you could make a private call. But because they were on a radio signal, the sound quality was dire. They were big old things, and the sound quality was really bad on them. And this one was digital, so I used one of these at home where people could ring in because it was physically plugged into the landline. And I was living in a shared house at the time, so we used this as the landline, and it was crystal clear, and no matter, even if you're at the top of the house, you still got a really good signal on it. Okay. And I think it would have sold really well just as that, as a cordless landline, the best cordless landline you could get. I think my father didn't do it because price-wise, I think it was up at about £89 or something, which at the time was a lot, when the other phones were maybe 20 or 30 quid. Okay. But this could have coexisted alongside them, because, some people would have paid 20 or 30 quid for the one that doesn't work very well, but there would have been a market for people that wanted to pay a bit extra, a good chunk extra, but to have much higher quality. And it could have sold as that, but it was never marketed as that. It was always this rather rabbit system with this sort of silly thing where people can't phone you, and you can't use it anywhere else other than a petrol station that's got a rabbit box, and anywhere that would have a rabbit box, like an airport. They've got payphones anyway, so you have an alternative already. Yeah, that's right. Very few people are going to pay a monthly subscription for something that, if they've got a few coins in their pocket.
But it's very interesting, because I realized that there was a lot that I didn't know. I didn't knew that base existed. I never found it.
Yeah, the one I've got at home, which is in the attic, it's got a base, so it sits in the base. Like that, and that also charges it, so you've got the connections on the back, so it'll just recharge it, and you just pick it out of the base to use it and flip it open, which is always quite nice. And that had a lead, the base had a lead that you could also plug into the wall. One lead for the power, another lead to plug in, and then that would be your landline connection. Okay.
And so this is more or less it. I don't know if there are things we didn't cover. We tried to be detailed, but if there are things you want to check and you need us, tell me. If not,
no, fantastic. There's a dance stuff that I've never touched upon. So really interesting to see it all.
You thought you were going to see so many things or not?
No.
Beyond.
Yeah, it's beyond what I was expecting. Very fantastic. Very pleased.
That's good, because of course it's good for the motivation of.
Fantastic. Thank you.